Three entrepreneurs walk in a bar.
Now, you think I'm going to tell you a joke, but this is a true story because I was one of the three entrepreneurs. We walked into a bar after finishing a long day of work, and we were walking in with some swagger, and we were happy, and we walked up to the bar. The bar was packed, and there was a guy at the end of the bar that said, "Get away from that shit from this place. We don't need that in here." Excuse my language, but that was his exact words. And, we looked at him and he looked at us, and the place became deadly silent. And at this point, what do? So we just kept looking, and I saw the bartender walk to the end of the bar and say, "Hey, Chris, these guys are not causing any problems. You need to calm down." And he muttered a few more names and finally calmed down, and everybody started talking, the music started playing, and as it got going again, I went down to see him. I said, "Hey, Chris," I used his name, just like the bartender did, because when we use people's names, that tends to let them know they're important. And I said, "What's going on? Can I help you? Are you okay?" And he told me, he was getting a divorce, his boss was a jerk, everything in life was bad. And he said, "And you don't have the financial issues I have. I'm about to go broke." I said, whoa, wait a minute. After 9/11, I went and sold my car to CarMax for $40,000 because we needed cash into the company. We had over 500 people. And I said, "So, you be careful before you say that, because I have been right where you were." And I said, "In fact, I had to get a rental." And I said, "I went to get a rental, and I had allocated $25 a day for my rental." And I walk up, and the rental agent said, "You can get an Escort or a Chevrolet GEO." That didn't sound good to replacing a Maserati. So I go, I look out on the car lot, and I go, "How much is that Prius?" He says, "That's $32 a day." And I said, "I tell you what, I'll give you 29. I'm entrepreneuring, right?" And I told Chris, I said, it's how we look at things. And the guy went behind the machine. He says, "Okay, I'll give it to you for $29. And a Prius is a better brand image than a Ford Escort. The Maserati said I had green, and this was another kind of green. And I said, "Chris, this is what we make choices." So today, as I get into scaling, I tell you that story there we go. I tell you that story to say the first thing on scaling is this. It's dealing with people. And almost many times people talk about scaling. I see it from the consultants on LinkedIn. It's like, just hire me, I show up, I have some magic dust, but you got to know how to deal with people. De-escalation sometimes. I know a lot of times we think about scaling as growth and everything's going, but a key skill of an entrepreneur, believe it or not, is de-escalation when things get tense, like it did with Chris. And it's uncomfortable choices. As I was building CliffCo with this current company, we got about 200 companies in our portfolio. And it got to the point where it was getting too much to do it the way we were doing it and handling it. So I went to my employee and said, "Hey, look, from now on, you can't deal with every new member individually. We're going to have to start grouping them because we got to start scaling." And this is what you got to understand. She said, "I like this job. I like meeting every new member. I want to do this job." And part of scaling is uncomfortable choices. And I had to say, "Katie," just like I said to Chris, "Katie, let's deal with this. Just think about how much more we could do if we scale for the number of entrepreneurs versus the way we're doing it now." So that's the part of scaling we're going to talk a little bit about today. And the final thing on scaling is this right here. And I'll get into the presentation. It is a mathematical equation. After dealing with people, it's math. And if everybody could write this down, if you want to know about scaling, does your incremental revenue increase faster than your incremental expenses per unit? And does the 1,000th unit cost less than the 999th unit? Now, you're talking about some gripping decisions to make it do that, and letting things go is part of it. So as you're scaling, this is what we know with 3 stages of company's growth: hypergrowth, human scale, financial scale. Now, hypergrowth is we get in, we find an underserved market, we get into the market, and people start buying, and revenue kind of solves all problems. But as you go up, what happens there where that goes down? Do you see? That's a natural occurrence. If that doesn't happen, what will happen? It continues to go up and flame out, and it totally bombs. But you got to go down. What's happening right there? That's a positive right there, to believe it or not, if you can get it back up the incline, which we're going to talk about today. What's happening right there is more. You need a little bit more infrastructure. You need more, usually leadership, or you've added leadership. I just this morning was talking with a company. They're losing money from making money. He said, I added 3 executives. And those 3 executives, those 3 payrolls are now on there, and those people have to produce, or else they will bring it down. So it's a very balancing act you're doing here. And the other part of that coming down is exactly that 1,000 unit or that 200 unit is costing the same as the previous units. And it will sooner or later, the company will collapse on its own weight and it will come down. So that is the part of hypergrowth. Now, here's where it gets exciting, is going back up human scale. And human scale is simple. We can add people and we can add profits. He could add those 3 people and still add profits if he was up human scale. And not every time we add somebody, we see profits come down. So this is a very important part of working these difficult choices and getting that mathematical equation to go back up to human scale. And then the financial scale is where you put systems in to increase profits. But at CliffCo, 80% of our companies, of the hundreds of companies that we have, 80% of them are right at the bottom of human scale, and they're starting that incline. Now, on this slide right here, what are the red dots? The red dots are where you're making up. And by the way, when you scale and you get to those red dots, why is that a good place to exit if you wanted to sell? That's part of what we do as sell companies. And we always tell entrepreneurs, exit at the red dots. Well, Cliff, I really don't want to. Everything's going really well. I don't see how anything can go wrong. You exit at the red dots because when you exit and sell, you're basically selling the future. And you can't sell the future when you go down into the trough. So that's why you actually sell when it's at its peak and at its best, and you feel like everything is going great. So that's kind of the landscape of how to get to a company from hypergrowth to scale and eventually sell. Because if you don't go back up human scale, you go to what we call no man's land. And no man's land is where out of 11 companies that get to 1 million in revenue, 9 of them go to no man's land because it's usually you're losing gross margin and you're losing traction, and you don't flame out, you just kind of go out there and sit in the wilderness for years. So this is why when I go into companies and I see them, I always go, what is your gross? I want to look at your gross margins. Because if your gross margin is deteriorating, that's just something we got to solve. We got to look at, because I want to keep you out of no man's land. So going back to that people side of it, how do you do this? Get up human scale. and get to that mathematical equation, which we'll talk about. But this right here is alignment. And this, you cannot go up human scale unless you have alignment of what we call these 7 S's. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but you can see them here. And I'm going to tell you somebody that mastered this skill. There's 2 people that mastered it. I should say this model. It was the founder of Southwest Airlines. Everybody's familiar with Southwest. And while he founded it in 1972, what was his shared values? Now, this is very critical. Shared values are not core values. I don't even pay attention to core values because that's something we make up in a conference room and agree on. Shared values is why do we exist as a business? You can't scale unless everybody knows why do we exist. At Southwest, what was it at Southwest? Get people off Greyhound buses so they can spend more time with their families. It's more intrinsic than we believe in, honesty, integrity, all that stuff's very important. But this right here drives the people to do it. The other person that mastered it was Schultz over at Starbucks. His was, we're going to be a meeting place. You don't even have to buy anything. Just come, we want to be the meeting place for America. So this is something you have to sit down and get everybody in the executive team and the company knows why we exist. Because if I know I'm getting you off a Greyhound bus and it's 2 a.m. in the morning and it's raining, I'm going to run to that airline a lot faster than if you just gave me $2 more an hour. I am here for a purpose. Systems at Southwest, I'm going to show you alignment. Systems, seat yourself. Does Greyhound have a reservation system that you pick a seat? No. System, seat yourself. Style, shorts and white socks versus uniform. Do you see how this is aligning? If he would have given them uniforms like all the other airlines, he probably wouldn't have made it. Because now it's confusion. So the strategy was low fares. Everybody, when I ask shared values, usually people say low fares. No, that was not the shared values. That was the strategy to get people to come and do business with you. The staff, he told pilots, you're not the most important person in the company. Now, 1972, most of them have been in the military. Think about that. The gate agent. We're going to pay our gate agents more than anybody else in the airline industry. So you can start seeing how you have to align all these elements together and put and wrap it into so that you can scale. If one of them is out of alignment, you can't scale. So, and in alignment, when you scale this, what does the market really want you to do? Let's say if you go sell, or if you go IPO, whatever you do, here's what the market wants. Predictable, scalable revenue growth. They don't want 30% we grow one year, 2% the next year. They want to see a steady increase in revenue at a predictable rate. So that's why that's the alignment of scale. Now right here, there's the Chasm Scale Challenge. Who buys our product? Many times to scale, you got to get across this chasm from innovators and early adopters. They're the easy ones that will get you going, but to get across the chasm, it is this right here. This is really important. And I had a company recently, they had gotten to $20 million a year in revenue, mainly on chiropractors. They had a medical device. Well, he started wanting to sell to MDs. MDs are late majority. So what was happening, to get across the chasm, you got to have a customer segment that gets you there. Southwest, it was vacationer travel. That was his bread and butter, the vacationers. So this is where to scale, you got to find that one customer segment and say, we will cross the chasm, and then we'll get into the early majority, late majority. Now, the thing that will give you predictability more than anything else, it just happens to be the hardest thing in the company, building a sales team. Sales team's the hardest one to build, but we figured it out for you. And what a scalable company with a sales team, these are the skills. And it kind of shocked us when we looked at all the people that were being successful. We said, what are their salespeople doing? Look at the last one, closing ability. The least likely skill you need. It is preparation, adaptability, domain experience. Preparation. Because if you've got a product and you're going through hypergrowth, the product or the service can sell itself. You just got to have a salesperson that goes out, preparation, they can adapt to that market, and they know your product or your service. So this was throwing many companies off from scaling as they couldn't build a sales team. And we found out we were doing it wrong. We were looking, the closing ability, least likely skill. So you can start to see why this scalability thing is kind of complex. And you know what? And I'm going to tell you right today, I know you probably heard a lot of motivational speeches, which those are all good. Scaling is a business of a long, hard grind with a few intermission moments of success. Those little red dots, those are the few intermissions of success. Otherwise, this is a grind. So as you're going across there, and you do start scaling, we run into another issue. We call it crossing the swamp. You cross the chasm because here's what happens. Everybody wants more. You walk in every day, I need more people, I need more process, I need more packaging, I need more. Because you've gotten some traction, you've gotten success, so everybody wants more. You got to solve that more problem because you can't please everybody and give everybody more. So how do you do that? How do you get across that swamp over there to where you can invest in learning, orientation, and training? And by the way, look at that last one on the right, culture. Culture is what you develop after you go through all of this. The biggest waste of time is talking about culture on the first day of your business. That's one of the biggest issues I see with startups. They're talking about the culture. You hadn't even gone through anything to develop a culture. But if you get through it, you can. So here is something we figured out to help entrepreneurs. The brand positioning hospitality chart. Believe it or not, I have fixed more companies and getting rid of the more with this chart right here, because you have to get to the point and say, who are we? And who's going to be our customer? Are we Motel 6? We'll leave the light on for you and not much else. That was intentional by the Richards Group out of Dallas, Texas, because they started attracting a customer. Where's the soap? Where's the newspaper? Where's your buffet? Their main customer was a truck driver at 11:30 p.m. wanting to leave at 4 a.m. So they built that campaign around getting rid of more. Are you Days Inn? Are you Holiday Inn, Marriott? But we have to decide who we are, and this is one of the hardest things an entrepreneur has to do, and that is say no. If you say, I'm going to be Holiday Inn, and the Ritz-Carlton customer calls, you got to say no. Now, you got to remember, in hypergrowth, we were taking all those checks. So now you got two uncomfortable choices. Make which one it is. If you see Holiday Inn there, they plowed out that big middle ground there and owned that middle spot for a long time. And we look at this with companies, how did they get that big spot there? It was one product, the Holiday Inn. Bill Rose was in Memphis, Tennessee with a 35-room hotel, nobody stopping by. A swimming pool. He got the swimming pool, and that built Holiday Inn. So, as you look at this chart, what is your Holiday Inn product? What is your Ritz-Carlton product? my pleasure came from Horst Schultz, who was on my technology board when I had my technology company. I spent a day with him at the Ritz-Carlton, Amelia Island. I met him at 6 a.m. on the loading dock, and he was throwing out strawberries because they were not big and pretty enough to get in his hotel. Because if you're going to be the Ritz-Carlton, you can't have small strawberries. That has got to be the strawberry that you got to have. So this chart right here, I encourage all of you to take this chart and get your management teams, your partners or whoever, to figure this out, not only for you, but your competition. Because many times you're competing against people who are not really your competitors. You're selling to the Motel 6 and they're selling to the Ritz. So all of this is part of scaling, is figuring out where I am on the brand positioning and then focusing on that customer. And then here's the grind. The grind is real, and it is this right here, infrastructure investment. If you can see up here, the startup, the hypergrowth, no man's land, human scale, financial scale. To move to each of these, there are attributes that you have to go to. If you look at the first one, structure of organization, in hypergrowth, a simple base management team. To get the human scale, you got to have a formal C-level leadership team. So when people are at the top of hypergrowth, I go, if you don't want to sell, then you got to start getting ready to making investments and risking capital to move over to the human scale expansion. If you see accounting systems, you got to go from QuickBooks now over human scale, more formal controls. So you have to ask yourself, do I have the talent in this company to do that? And if you do, it's one of the greatest things in the world is go for it. But it's also a good decision sometimes to go, you know what? I'll take money off the table. But you have to decide, do I have the money, the investment, the leadership, and the willingness to experiment? Because none of this is going to be right the first time. Part of scaling is out there escalating, de-escalating, escalating, de-escalating, experimenting, trying to find, how do I get my incremental revenue increasing faster than my incremental expenses? And it goes on. All of these right here are business issues that you have to move over. Now, I promise you this is the last grind slide I have, because I know this is not pretty. And people like to give pretty speeches, which those are good too, but what I like to give you is what it takes so you can make good decisions. But this is one of the most important things to scale, is we call this CRM cliff. My first technology company was a CRM company. I started the first CRM company in the country. Salesforce was one of the people who bought us. They did a lot better than we did, but we did pretty good. But this right here is where we used to have a lot of arguments. And how do you embed these processes into your CRM? Now, I think next week, Kenzie's here with me. Kenzie, next week we're going to a client in South Florida, and we're sitting down with the VP of sales, and they built a $10 million company on spreadsheets. But guess what happened? It's starting to peak out. So we're going to sit down with them and say, okay, let's talk about how do you pre-qualify a lead? And if you look down there at sales assets, what sales assets do you need? Pre-qualify, you need the elevator pitch. But then the qualify, the develop, propose, close, hand off. This is scaling. And when people talk to you about scaling, if they can't do this, they can't do anything with scaling. And all of these, what we have done here, we did codify this. So next week, we'll take what they've been doing in spreadsheets and informally and put this in. Then all 5 of their salespeople will start following this. So now we have a concentration of knowledge, we'll have reporting, and we'll go from 10 million to 50 million. Without that, we will go 10 million to 12 million and sputter. So that's part of also the incline of scale. This is a dogfight next week, a good dogfight, a very positive dogfight. But it's going to be where the VP of sales has to get with her salespeople. And the most important thing here is standards, how you enter the information. This is nitty gritty. Now, Steve Jobs told us, business is nitty gritty. And this is getting down to, this is how you fill out a CRM record. And everybody's got to do it the same way. And adopt this, but it's profound what this one slide here can do for a company. And as you're doing all this, you have to remember, simplify, simplify, simplify. Every day of your life, you got to get up and go, because it gets complicated. And you know what you have to remember, we acquire costs, we put in inputs, we have operations, and we have outputs called selling. And don't start thinking that it's an accounting company, an HR company, it's all this kind of, this is basically simplification every day and a reminder, inputs, operations, outputs. So, as you go through that and you simplify, this is the slide I would tell you, and I've got in my book, No Grow Exit, all this is in the book, No Grow Exit, is spend a lot of time with this. Of our companies that are in CliffCo, when they go to interview, they have this in their lap because they want to make sure the styles match up. You know, would a Delta pilot had worked at Southwest? No, you could have hired them as chief pilot, and it would have been a disaster. Although that pilot, Delta pilot, probably was incredibly qualified. But they get there, the style mixes up. The staff, who are the heroes in your company? The gate agents at Southwest. Who are we going to focus on? And I'm going to end with this right here. We all make mistakes. My company had gotten to about 350 people, and the controller came to me and said, we got to have a new accounting system. Just like that chart shows, we've gotten to human scale. And I said, I want you to go get one. You get what you need. And I kind of blew him off because I was busy, right? I'm out selling and all that good stuff. He went and got what he needed, but it was not what the company needed. We were a company that moved very fast, and it slowed the entire company down. We couldn't bill or pay bills for 2 weeks because the system we made a mistake there in alignment. Our systems got out of alignment with our style and shared values. So going back to Chris that I talked about at the beginning, you got a lot of Chris moments in this thing. And the thing to think about at scale is how we deal with our people and how we respond to them. You know, when he said that in that bar, I could have said, well, you know, go take a hike, buddy. There's a lot of things I could have done to really escalate it. And probably if I'd have been a little younger, I probably would have, but wiser with a little bit of seasoning. But through this scale model, you're going to have a lot of moments with the Chris's, and the thing that will keep them coming back if they understand your shared values with the company. If they understand those, they will forgive you for a lot of mistakes if they understand why we're doing all of this. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you for staying awake. Bye-bye.